If you could have dinner with anyone, living or dead, who would you choose?
I think I would choose to have dinner with Björk,
Oh.
who is musically one of the greatest influences on my kind of early developmental years, in embracing a very broad sense of being creative, being queer, being left of centre, just being a fairly true and authentic voice to herself. So I would love to have dinner with Björk.
Good choice.
Thank you.
No worries. Before we start today, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So we're filming on Wurundjeri land today, and I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land, past, present, and emerging. I'm Teddy, I'm 20 years old, and I use he and they pronouns. And today I'll be talking to Gareth, who works with the Beringia Cultural Centre, and I'll let Gareth introduce themselves.
Thanks, Teddy. Yes, my name's Gareth Hart. I work as the Creative Director and CEO at Beringia Cultural Centre. I identify as non-binary, and Beringia is a cultural centre within the Yarra Ranges Shire.
Awesome. So, let's get into things.
Okay.
What are some of the best things about being part of the queer community?
I think the openness. There's an openness to difference, which I think is kind of at the core of our community, and I love that because it's defining the undefined. So it's not a definition of a narrow type, it's a definition of inclusion and acceptance in a broad way, which I really, really love. I also love the conversation in what I call the queer community around intersectionality, and I think we are a community that's based on values. So the values that are within our community kind of bond us, and I think that's one of the most significant and powerful things about the LGBTIQ space.
Absolutely, that resonates with me.
Yeah.
Do you often find yourself as a role model or support to young LGBT people that you work with?
I have two answers to that. One is that consciously I don't think so, but then every now and again something pops up and I realise that I have been. I was working with a group of young artists a few years ago who were part of an exhibition project that I was working on, and I just think I'm Gareth. I just think I'm a person that loves fashion and arts and lots of strange, wonderful things, but I don't often own that identification in the queer community in the sense of championing something or being an active advocate in that way. I just see it as part of my kind of whole makeup. And I was working with this group of young artists, and out of the blue, one of them asked me to be a reference on a job application after the project, and I was, very humbled by that. And then through that, we started talking, and they actually asked if we could get coffee and have a bit more of a deeper conversation about some things. And this person actually announced to me that they were considering a transition and thought that they were coming to terms with the trans identity. So that was a moment where I realised that actually, whether or not I actively step forward into that space, that, and it's not just about me, anybody has a kind of role of advocacy or mentorship. When you're proud of yourself, other people do tend to kind of look to that. But I wasn't quite aware that was happening. Yeah, I just thought I looked strange.
I doubt you looked strange.
Thanks, Teddy.
Have you ever felt worried about your self-expression as someone visibly LGBT, or being different or unprofessional in the workplace?
This is something I've been thinking a little bit about. I have been openly queer most of my adult life, and I've never really felt that was a burden, or that was a hindrance, or that was a barrier to anything. And as far as I know, it hasn't affected my role in the workplace or how people perceive me or whatnot. But what's been really interesting is in the last sort of 5 years, openly being a non-binary person, working in professional settings, and also particularly recently sort of chasing or climbing that ladder a little bit, where I find myself with these these letters in my job title now that say CEO, and also through COVID last year, growing a beard as an act of laziness because I didn't have to shave. So it's very, very interesting being in that role with this beard, which are maybe historically markers of masculinity, or people perceive these things in a really masculine sort of way. So that's been really interesting to try and own my identity as a non-binary person, and living on a gender spectrum, or living within a gender spectrum, but within these, I guess, signifiers or codes of masculinity, like, you know, kind of like there's old ideas of leadership and the sense of facial hair and you know, a voice that is that you know, might hint at masculinity in some other ways. So that's been really interesting, and I feel like there have been moments where not my sexuality, but my gender identity has, I'm very conscious of that in the workplace, and how that is perceived, and maybe not even necessarily, in all positive ways. I'm very conscious of the privilege that comes with an aesthetic that looks like a white cis man, and some of the privilege that comes with that. And so that's a pretty interesting thing to unpack internally, when you don't identify in that way, but you almost visually present in that way. So there's a sort of interesting tension in that. I warned you before that I might waffle, and I think I'm doing that.
Yeah, not at all. Actually, I was going to say that this is actually very relevant to our next question, which is, what is it like for a queer male-presenting person to wear makeup in the office? I don't wear makeup often. I love eyeliner, so often I'll put a kind of dramatic eye on my face. I think it's, again, I want to acknowledge my privilege here that I've grown up in a very safe environment, and I feel very powerful and strong in myself. So the decision to do that is not difficult for me, to put on makeup and go to work. But I fully acknowledge it is very hard for other people, or can be very hard for other people. But what's really interesting is the first time that I wore eyeliner to work, nobody gave me a hard time for that. Nobody gave me flack for that or whatnot. But what was interesting was that everybody commented on it, but in a positive way. So everybody would reference, I love the eyeliner. That's the first time I've seen that on you, rah-de-rah. And so even though they weren't criticising that behaviour or condemning it or telling me not to do that, it creates an othering there. It creates a sense of you've done something different and we're noticing it. That, like I said, that is a very, very small microcosm there, and other people have a much more intense experience of wearing makeup in the workplace. So I can only imagine that I'm just scratching the surface of the iceberg there. Of course, still very valuable insight though.
Thanks, Steve.
And where and what do you think our community spaces could improve on?
I think the public domain is a really pretty scary place. Even as, like I said, someone who's very sure of themselves and very proud and strong in themselves, like I feel like I am. But the sense of, anonymity in public space is really scary. I can walk, I live pretty far from the city, but I love heading into the city. There's like really dynamic arts and culture and diversity and lots of amazing things and food and lots of different cultures going on there. So I love doing that, and I love catching the train into the city. And I'm very, very conscious every time I get to Flinders Street Station and I cross that kind of pretty chaotic crossways of those two streets in the middle of the CBD, and the sense of that massive amount of people in what is a big but not ginormous city of Melbourne, and not knowing any of them, and the kind of internal dialogue that goes on in your mind about your questioning of taking up space, questioning of being of attracting attention as someone that might look a little different, might be a little different, and that's really okay. So I think public space is really hard because we make a bunch of internal assumptions about how people are perceiving us or how people are connecting with us or not connecting with us. So that's the first thing. I don't know if that is your question is how might we make those spaces more safe, and I'm not sure how we would do that in that way. There are some really fundamental things that we can start doing. I think the binary gender identity is everywhere, and it's impossible to get away from. I was talking about being in the middle of the city and crossing a road. Like, the symbol to cross a road is a kind of what we identify as a masculine figure, you know, and it's been a really positive thing, but considered quite a radical thing where they've now got female identifying traffic lights. So even in that, we're still talking about a binary. So it's very, very rare to find public toilets that are gender neutral or all gender. So there is some of these small, or what I would consider small things, but actually have a pretty significant impact on the way people feel in public spaces. Yeah, but it's a huge thing to unpack, right? Because thousands of years, you know, pre-colonial Western systems of understanding or identifying in particular ways that we're trying to undo here. So I don't know how to make them more safe, but I really hope they are. And I hope people like you and I champion that in whatever ways we can. Yeah, because it can be a really scary space. I don't know really how to articulate this, but I was just thinking about, is there a way that public space can give you a hug? You know, because sometimes like a hug just makes you feel okay, and how can we make our public spaces give us all a hug? That's the way we change it.
Absolutely. Even something as simple as a pride flag somewhere.
Yeah. Associating with that, you know, identifying with symbols that say, we see you. Yeah.
Absolutely. How do you cope with anxiety around your sexuality and the idea that you're not queer enough, or especially if you're in a straight presenting relationship?
I'm not in a straight presenting relationship, but I do think a lot about my identification in that community, because I've never particularly engaged deeply in it. Even as a younger kind of queer person, I probably until the age of 30 had only been to maybe like 5 dedicated queer spaces in the sense of, you know, bars or you know, music venues that are there to support the queer community. So I guess I do have some anxiety around it. But I'm very privileged to work in the arts and cultural sector, and it's an incredibly embracing and supportive space, particularly of anything that might be seen as different, you know, gender, sexuality, cultural diversity, ability, all these kind of things. So I guess I deal with my anxiety by committing and continuing to an industry that supports difference and expression. So I have this beautiful synergy between like work, personal life, my arts practice, almost every single one of my friends, all of my support networks, and all of the things that I do are pretty embedded in the arts industry, and it's a very supportive place. With, you know, some work to do still in many ways. No system is perfect, but again, I was saying before, I work in an industry that's values based. You know, so if I'm not getting it from the arts industry, I don't know where I'll get it from. So that's how I deal with it. I just turn to art, I guess.
Yes, that's definitely my safe space as well. Yeah. So I get what you're saying.
Yeah, great.
So, bit of a toughie for this one. What do you wish you knew before coming out?
I don't know if it's necessarily a knowledge, but I just wish I had done it earlier. I didn't come out. I came out to close friends when I was about 18 or 19, and then family around that time, 20 or 21 or something like that. But I just wish I'd done it 6, 7, 8 years earlier when I actually knew, because it would have just avoided all of that nearly a decade of anguish, and it was never, it's not like a choice that was then going to change again, so why wouldn't I just do that earlier? And I fully acknowledge that it's difficult for a lot of people, and it was, in my own way, it was difficult for me. But I sort of feel like it's such a trope, but I sort of feel like I was someone else for those years of my life, when, from sort of early teenagehood to early adulthood. I knew who I was, just nobody else did. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't tell me. But I just wish I had have done it earlier. But again, I acknowledge that I was in a very safe family environment where I could do that, where I could have done that.
What makes you proud?
Makes me proud. Being asked to be in a film like this, to talk about kind of gender and sexual difference in corporate workplaces and whatnot, like this wasn't a conversation that's happening 15, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, and I'm sitting next to an amazing non-binary person and myself as well, and we're doing that on camera and being asked we're being asked to tell those stories. We're not having to shout those stories out. And in other parts of the world and other parts of Australia, we're still having to shout. But I think there's a shift, and that is pretty exceptional, I think. So I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of us being asked and sitting in a space like this to tell these kind of stories in a safe way. And I guess the other part of what am I proud of is what do I hope for, and I hope that this is a kind of a stone in the water, so the ripples do that. And I hope that this is a safe space for conversations globally.
Of course. Well, you've certainly already made your impact by showing up and sharing. As an LGBT person, do you feel you have to be the lead voice in LGBT issues in your workplace, or are you supported by your peers?
I really like this question because I think it starts to get beyond just the me, which is really nice. So I think I was mentioning before that sometimes you accidentally become kind of the lead or an advocate or you're seen in that kind of way, and of course we can't help that. But I think the point of community is togetherness. So, as far as I know, I'm the only queer person in the organisation I work for at the moment. That doesn't mean there aren't other queer people in there, but as far as I know, I'm the only one. So I do feel like it falls to me a little bit, but I also think that there's an incredible sense of support around that. So from moment one in my interview for this new role, first meeting with all the staff members, I was very open about my identification and my who I am, in its gender and sexuality way, and it's very open about that. So I feel like there is a sense of shared responsibility there, but it's an interesting thing because in a position that is somewhat about leadership, people look to you for kind of forward momentum or for leading something. So I feel like I often have to lead and have in probably my last 3 or 4 roles, but there has been this beautiful sense of just sort of following or coming together around that with peers and colleagues. And particularly in a broader space, if you think beyond the workplace and beyond the kind of confines of a building or an organisation. Like I said before, community is about coming together, and I think particularly in Melbourne and Naarm and the kind of outskirts of that, there's this growing sense of coming together through advocacy and protest and championing for like ethics to be at the centre of everything that we do. So there's definitely a sense of peerdom around that. It's interesting. I think on a broad scale, I don't have to be a leader, but in a very immediate way, I do, or a very close way. So in my organisation, I feel like I will probably be the only one to start championing queer rights in the workplace, and everyone will follow. But I feel like if I don't do that in a if I don't start a protest in Melbourne for that, somebody will. There will be someone. So there's sort of this weird zooming in and zooming out of that. And I like to think that, I read a quote, I can't remember who said it, but the quote was something along the lines of, the more local something is, the more universal it is, which is really beautiful. So the fact that I'm doing whatever I'm doing in my very kind of small sphere probably means that there's millions of other people doing that. And it's so what I'm doing is probably quite a universal thing. And together there's a kind of bigger impact. Yeah. I didn't mean to say that it wasn't my role to like start a protest in Melbourne, because I would happily do that if I felt like I needed to.
Yes,
Yeah.
I get what you mean though. Like at the centre of change, it comes from the community and from the places that are local to you. That's where you can really start the ball rolling.
Yeah.
So, but I get your intent.
Yeah. I remember I did this weird course thing, might have been like 19 or something, and it was very, very early days of really understanding that the environment was in a pretty scary place, and this facilitator was talking about mass action or collective action, and I made some comment about recycling in the home environment, and this facilitator basically said it's not important anymore. We actually need to be, dealing with like big business and international travel and all these kind of things, and I completely respect that. But if we're also not recycling at home, then this stuff is pointless. It's the togetherness that actually leads to long-term change. So I think the same thing. Yeah.
And I think today we will wrap up on the question of, what message would you like to give to young queer people?
So hard to answer because it's going to be recorded. Like what is the message? Know that there are people that you can reach out to. It's just about finding those people. And I guess I'm thinking about us sitting in front of these cameras and having this pretty amazing conversation, and thinking about who might see this in a couple of months' time, a few days' time, a couple of years' time. And I guess if there's someone listening that feels like they don't have anyone that they can connect to, they can definitely try and find me on Facebook, or they can find my email address on the Barringer website. And I would be someone that would be happy to connect in that way. Know that there are people that are there for you and to listen and support. And if you don't know who those people are yet, just trust that those people are there. There's just a bit of detective work to find them. Does that make sense? It
does make sense.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I think by doing this kind of project, like, you in turn are finding other people. Like, it's a two-way street. It's a mutual connection. And that's why this is so important.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and for talking to me and being so open and vulnerable.
My pleasure, Teddy. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah. Would you like a hug?
Yes.
Thanks so much.
No worries at all. I was really lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
No worries.